just kind of crazy to think that Jack Flaherty's probably the second greatest black pitcher in Cardinals history, maybe.
I mean,
certainly
that's crazy already.
I would
but
probably
true.
say number 3. I mean, because you've got Lee
Okay.
Smith, who spent his time here, and who's obviously a
Yeah.
Hall of Famer and whatnot.
Yeah.
There might be a couple people missing in there, but when it comes to talent, I feel pretty confident saying 2 or 3, definitely.
Yeah, sure.
Conversation.
Sure.
But
Sure.
he goes out and pitches the game that he pitched in the postseason on the day that Gibson passes. I mean, it's just kind of freaky how that worked out. Obviously, that didn't work out for the Cardinals to pick up the win, but I mean, Flaherty certainly did that. And I think Flaherty, without a doubt, felt that presence. I know they had a relationship, and I know that he had a lot to do with forming him, and that Gibson, saw things in him that he recognized and that he admired. And certainly, Gibson's admiration, there's no doubt about how Jack Flaherty and everybody else that came after him. I mean, he sits at the head of the table of the Black Aces, in baseball history, who are the, either the Cy Young winner or the 20 game winners, the 9 pitchers that have done that in MLB history that are African-American pitchers. But it brings up to a bigger question that one of our listeners sent to me and reached out to me and asked about. And he said, what MLB franchise has the best African-American players of all time, if you had to break it down and look at it? So, me, I took that as a reason to do a research project. So I did that, and I went into and to break down how I went through this is I just looked at the top 1,000 players in MLB history by WAR, along with a couple of people I know played for different franchises and moved them into it. And the takeaways were interesting when you look at it, and certainly the exceptional African-American players who stand out on their organizations are there. And there's a lot of franchises that have had that success. We talk about Lou Brock, we talk about Bob Gibson, we talk about Ozzie Smith. I mean, with the Cardinals, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. The Cardinals have been, as far as when you talk about depth, they've been one of the richest franchises in African-American players. You go to an MVP like Willie McGee, just Curt Flood, everything he was on the field. Let's not even talk about what he did off of it. But one of the most gifted defensive center fielders and a 300 hitter of all time. Bill White, Ray Langford, Lee Smith, just a lot of guys that are there.
Vince Coleman.
Sure. Terry Pendleton.
Those guys.
Just Lonnie Smith. A lot of guys. You could go on and on.
Sure.
But, so I put together a list of some franchises that stood out among the other ones for me. And I just want to throw a couple of teams out and just kind of get your thoughts about them, because you've seen a few of these things. And maybe at the end we'll decide which ones we think has the bigger thing. So I think the team that stood out to me that my head went to right away, and I mean, I just think that you think about them right away, is the Dodgers. Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella, the first, the greatest black catcher in MLB history for sure. Don Newcomb, the first Cy Young winner. You've got other guys like Willie Davis and Dusty Baker, Al Downing, Mookie Betts being there now. There's more. I mean, I'm sure there's. I know I'm missing.
You're missing Maury Wills.
Thank you. There you go, Maury Wills. Thank you.
On that, I mean, and that's that's, they were very important, at that time because before there was Ricky, before while there was Lou, Maury Wills was his competition in the National League, while Aparicio in the American League, weren't as much in stealing bases in. But Maury was a headache. Maury was a triple every time he got on, on the bags, on that. So I mean, and that's and so another franchise that stood out for me while putting this together. And I tell you what, one that really came strong, the Cincinnati Reds. Sure.
Frank Robinson, Joe Morgan, Ken Griffey Jr., Barry Larkin, George Foster, Reggie Sanders, Ken Griffey Sr., Ron Gant during his time there. I know I'm missing some people, and they've got another young black guy that's coming up. I'm sorry, Eric Davis. There we go. That's
Aaron Davis.
About, but when you look at that list, you've got 3 MVPs in the Reds uniform right there in Robinson, Morgan, and Larkin.
And the interesting thing about the Cincinnati Reds then is, I mean, they just kept it rolling. I mean, they made a huge misstep, when they got into that salary dispute with Frank, and Frank just took that, and you talk about stoking a fire. All he did the first year after they traded him was went over to the American League and won the Triple Crown,
Yeah,
and the MVP. But you know what? But for anybody that knows Frank, that doesn't surprise me, on that. Because if you talk about people with an edge, and and someday, whether it be on your podcast or my podcast, we'll get on and talk about just how fortunate I've been directly and to a certain extent you indirectly through that have been to have the relationships and be able to have the pass-throughs with some of the people in this game that I have. But when I think about people with edges, and I and it's funny that whenever I talk about Frank Robinson, I just always say Frank, because that's the relationship that that we had. And but when you talk about people with edges, you talk about Gibson, you talk about Frank. Another guy that we don't talk about that played with an edge, and a lot of people don't really talk about him that much, is Billy Williams. Billy wasn't no joke. I mean, Billy played with that edge.
And that's another franchise that certainly has that thing in the Cubs, and Ernie Banks, Andre Dawson, Billy Williams.
Ferguson Jenkins.
Derek Lee, who's a little bit of an underrated contributor for his time. Lee Smith, another Hall of Famer who really cut his teeth there. Jason Hayward being there now, who, certainly is an accomplished pitcher there. Ferguson Jenkins and being a black man, but being a Canadian. And this
being a Canadian,
an African-American list, but on semantics, I'm not going to hold that against Fergie, put him on this.
I was just, as I said that, I was thinking, Fergie, I'm trying to sneak him in. So
I'm particular about my orientation.
Yeah, I know that.
But then you talk about the Orioles. I mean, you got Frank Robinson, Eddie Murray, Harold Baines, Adam Jones. I mean, another one. Not quite at the level that made the cut of these Dodgers and Cardinals and the Reds, but another organization that came really strong and really had a lot of guys. The Pittsburgh Pirates.
Oh my gosh.
Quiet as kept. The Pirates have had 4 African-American MVPs, more than any other franchise, between Barry Bonds, Willie Stargell, Andrew McCutchen, and Dave Parker. That's impressive. Then you also have to add in Bill Matlock and Bobby Bonilla, and just all of the different people they've had there. The time they ran the 9 black players out at once, I mean, that takes up a whole slot right there. That hadn't happened before and hasn't happened since in Major League Baseball history.
Right.
That's a remarkable thing to see, and that's one of the most exceptional but underestimated moments in MLB history.
Yeah, I mean, because even you got to remember that baseball was almost living in 2 realities, some in the 60s, because the American League cities were a little slower to come to a lot of African-American players in some instances. I remember having the privilege of because I got to see both leagues, as because I used to visit your great-grandfather who lived in Detroit, a lot. So I got to see American League Baseball before there was interleague, and I got to see a Willie Horton with the Tigers and Lou Whitaker. And then, Frank and those guys would come to town, and those Oriole teams that I was lucky enough to be there with that, with an all-black outfield, Matt, which was kind of like, whoa, because Don Buford and Paul Blair and Frank were out there in the outfield, a lot of the time. So, we've talked before about black catchers because you had Elrod Hendricks catching on that team.
Which is a rarity, which is something
so there's so many, man, that, that's what makes baseball gives new birth every year. And that's the reason why I can be a fan 55 years later and wake up to new hope, every spring and new anticipation, every spring.
So 2 more teams that kind of made this elite cut that I had here, and then, kind of talk about the one that we think maybe stepped out the most in both of our eyes. It's how do you do a list of greatness in the game and not mention the New York Yankees. You know, you talk about American League teams that came around, but when you look at some of the guys that have come across there,